I made a shocking discovery in my wife's bag, and it nearly destroyed our marriage. From that moment, everything changed. Sarah, my wife of 10 years, welcomed me home from work like any other Wednesday evening. But instead of the usual small talk, she sat me down, saying there was something serious we needed to discuss. I braced myself, already sensing the heavy conversation coming. Once I was seated, she started by telling me how much she loved me and how deeply committed she was to our marriage. But for some reason, her words didn't comfort me. In fact, they had the opposite effect, they made me uneasy. "All right," I muttered cautiously, but before I could say anything more, she cut me off with a deep breath and dropped a bombshell. "I love you," she began, "and I see us growing old together, but I've decided I want to have an affair." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I was floored, completely blindsided by the admission. Struggling to make sense of what she just said, I asked, "Wait, so you love me, you don't want to ruin our relationship, but you're planning to be with someone else?" Sarah was quick to clarify. "It's not exactly like that. There's someone I've met, and I want a physical relationship with him. But it wouldn't be all the time, just now and then. And I promise I'll be completely honest with you about everything. I truly believe our love is strong enough that this won't change how I feel about you. If you love me as much as you say, you'll understand that this is something I need." She said it so calmly, like it was the most reasonable request in the world. Still reeling, I asked, "How can you possibly think this won't affect us? Have you already made plans with him?" Without hesitation, she confirmed it. "We're tentatively planning a weekend getaway next week." My heart pounded in my chest. "How would you react if the roles were reversed?" I asked, testing her. She gave me a sharp look and challenged, "You'd lose your mind if I ever suggested this." I couldn't help but scoff. "I'd be okay with it," I replied, though my voice was strained, "as long as you could assure me it wouldn't change anything between us." Sarah wasn't buying it. "Come on, you know that's not true," she said, sounding disappointed. "I thought your love for me would be enough to make you accept this." I stared at her in disbelief. "Do you honestly think I'd just stand by while you spend the weekend with another man?" For the first time, she hesitated. "Maybe I didn't think this all the way through," she admitted quietly, looking down. "You're right. I didn't consider everything, including my own feelings. But, if I say no now, will you still go through with it?" She looked me straight in the eyes and said softly, "I'm not sure. I didn't think you'd actually say no." It was clear neither of us had fully thought this through. After a long silence, she suggested, "How about we give it a few days? I need time to think, and then we can sit down and talk again on Sunday." That night, I couldn't bear to sleep in the same bed as her, not after what she'd just said. I gathered my things and moved into the guest room. When Sarah noticed, she asked what I was doing. "I don't feel like sleeping next to someone who's more focused on another man than on me," I told her flatly. I slammed the door behind me, my mind racing with anger and confusion. The night dragged on, and I couldn't sleep, but the time alone gave me a chance to think. One thing became painfully clear: if Sarah went through with her plan, our marriage would be over. The next morning, we didn't speak. After leaving for work, I called in and took a couple of personal days. That's when I set my plan into motion. First, I bought 3 voice-activated recorders. I placed one near the phone, one in our bedroom, and one in her car. I even tapped the landline to record any calls made from the house. Then, I went to our cell provider. Since I handled her account, it was easy to pull her phone records. While she was still at work, I dug through her emails. I found a secret account and guessed the password. What I found inside made my stomach drop, but at least I confirmed she hadn't slept with him yet. I forwarded all new messages from her secret email account to myself, without leaving any trace. I wasn't done, though. I bought 2 GPS trackers, one for her wallet and another for her car. By the end of the day, I had set everything up to monitor her movements. All I needed now was access to her phone, which I planned to get later that night. When I checked her emails again, I saw she had been messaging a coworker named Jason Jones, the man she was planning to cheat with. I was furious. Jason was going to learn exactly how it felt to have your world torn apart. That Friday, I went straight to a divorce lawyer and began the process, citing adultery. I made sure Jason Jones was named in the paperwork. The lawyer assured me it was an open and shut case as long as I had evidence. I handed over the emails, phone records, and told him I'd have recordings soon. He seemed satisfied and promised to get things started right away. When Sarah came home that evening, I gave her the cold shoulder, refusing to speak. She busied herself with dinner, but I wasn't staying for that. I grabbed my keys and headed to a bar to eat and have a couple of beers. When I got back, she tried to start a conversation, but I walked straight past her and into the guest room, slamming the door behind me. At this point, the only way she could save our marriage was to call off her plans with Jason, but I wasn't holding my breath. I ignored her all weekend, letting the tension build between us. By Sunday afternoon, I figured it was time to lay it all out. We sat down in the kitchen, and I was as blunt as I could be. I've spent the last few days thinking long and hard about your request, Sarah, I began, my voice steady but firm. And no matter how I try to look at it, I can't find a way to be okay with it. You say it won't affect our marriage, but it already has. Just look at us, we can barely have a conversation without tension. You're not putting yourself in my shoes, or you'd see why I can't accept this. Sarah frowned, crossing her arms defensively. How can you be so selfish? If you love me, why can't you let me have this? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Selfish? I shot back. I think it's pretty selfish to want to be with someone else after we've built a life together. She leaned forward, narrowing her eyes. And what if I go through with it anyway? I met her gaze, unflinching. There will be consequences, Sarah. We made vows 10 years ago to be faithful to each other. I know, she said, almost dismissively, but this is something I need to do. At that moment, I knew there was no turning back. I stood up and grabbed my laptop. Well, I guess we're done here, then. You really need to think hard about this, I said, before walking out of the room. I needed space, so I went to a nearby spot where I could monitor her emails without her hovering around. Sarah's stubbornness only fueled my resolve. I watched as she emailed Jason, assuring him that she was definitely going, no matter what I said. Jason, just as eager, confirmed he had already booked room 125 at the Hilton in Kansas City for Friday and Saturday night. I couldn't help but smirk. They were making this all too easy. In their emails, they talked about plans for a romantic Saturday night, complete with dinner, dancing, and plenty of alone time. Sarah even mentioned buying new lingerie for the occasion. They acted like teenagers sneaking around, completely oblivious to the fact that I was reading every word. By Friday, I had everything ready. I'd been to Kansas City the day before, reserved their hotel room for myself on Thursday night, and set up hidden cameras. Everything was perfectly positioned to capture their affair. It was all the evidence I needed for my divorce case. As an added bonus, I reserved a room near theirs so I could monitor them in real time. Sarah and I barely spoke as she prepared for her weekend getaway with Jason. I watched her pack, knowing exactly what was in store for her. When she wasn't looking, I slipped a GPS tracker into her wallet, right next to her cash and cards. It was almost laughable how easy it had been to set everything in motion. By the time Friday morning rolled around, I left the house at my usual time, not saying a word to her. I headed straight to my lawyer's office, signing the divorce papers. I let them know I'd have all the evidence they needed by Monday, and I requested that Sarah be served at her workplace, as a final blow. Jason would be served as well, with a lawsuit for alienation of affection. It was all coming together. After checking the GPS tracker, I saw Sarah was at the hair salon, probably getting dolled up for Jason. I used the opportunity to head home, open her suitcase, and found the new lingerie she'd bought. It was undeniably sexy, but knowing it wasn't meant for me stung. I put on rubber gloves, took out the underwear, and sprayed the crotch of her panties and the cups of her bra with pepper spray. Once I tucked them back into her suitcase, I smiled. This was going to be interesting. Later that afternoon, I headed to Kansas City, checked into their hotel room, and made sure all my surveillance equipment was running smoothly. Everything was in place. By the time I got home that night, the reality hit me: my marriage was over, but I wasn't done yet. Sarah came home later that evening, and I didn't even bother to look at her. She tried to act friendly, but I cut her off. "Save that for Jason," I said coldly. "I don't need your pity." I walked past her, slammed the guest room door behind me, and settled in for the night. It was a long, sleepless night, but I knew everything was set to bring this whole mess to an end. Friday came, and I left as usual, heading to finalize the last steps. That night, everything would fall apart for Sarah, and there was no coming back. Friday unfolded just as I'd anticipated. I spent the morning at my lawyer's office, signing the final papers and confirming that Sarah would be served on Monday. Everything was in motion, and I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me as I left the office. When I got home, Sarah was still getting ready for her big weekend with Jason. I didn't say a word, just watched as she put on the lingerie I'd sprayed earlier. She looked stunning, I'll give her that, but it didn't matter. I was done being affected by her charms. She noticed me watching and tried to cover up, but I waved it off. "Don't bother," I said. "I've seen it all before." She flushed with embarrassment, but I could see she was trying to act confident. I couldn't help but tell her, "You look incredible today. It's just a shame you never put this much effort in for me." She looked down, fiddling with the fabric of her lingerie. "I just wanted to feel good about myself," she mumbled. "Well, you do," I admitted, "but it seems like you're more concerned with impressing him than you ever were about me." She apologized, but it felt empty. "I only wanted to feel attractive," she said. I sighed, my voice softening. "You've always been beautiful to me, Sarah. I've always loved you. I thought you loved me too." Reaching out, I slipped her wedding rings off her finger. She gasped but didn't stop me. "These rings," I said, holding them up, "they meant something to me. They symbolized a promise we made, to forsake all others. But clearly, that promise doesn't mean much to you anymore." I pocketed the rings, including the engagement ring that had belonged to my mother. "I don't want to see you wearing these while you're with another man. The engagement ring has sentimental value, I'm keeping it." She stood there in stunned silence as I turned away. "I won't be here when Jason arrives," I told her flatly. "But don't let him step foot in my house. If you do, I'll make sure neither of you will ever forget it." "What do you mean by that?" she asked nervously. "I'm serious," I said, my tone icy. "He's not welcome here, Sarah. Do you understand?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, I won't let him inside." "Good," I said. "Because I'll be watching." With that, I walked out, leaving her standing there. I parked my car a few blocks away, just out of sight but close enough to see when Jason showed up. It didn't take long. His car pulled up, and I watched as he walked to the door, suitcase in hand. Sarah greeted him with a long, passionate kiss, and they embraced like two teenagers sneaking around behind their parents' backs. She glanced in my direction, a smug grin on her face, as if she thought she'd won. I didn't hesitate, I flipped her off as they drove away, wiping that grin right off her face. Once they were gone, I headed back home. The first thing I did was change all the locks and update the garage door code. Then, I grabbed the suitcase I had packed and drove to Kansas City. I checked into the hotel, went straight to the room, and set up my laptop to monitor the hidden cameras. As soon as they checked in, I saw them on the feed. It didn't take long for them to get intimate, but what I saw next made me laugh out loud. Jason wasn't exactly well endowed, and Sarah's face showed clear frustration as their first round ended almost as soon as it started. He crawled back into bed, ready for another try, but I could already tell she wasn't going to get what she wanted from this weekend. I let the cameras record while I went out for dinner and drinks. By the time I got back, Jason was passed out, and Sarah was sitting on the edge of the bed, looking annoyed. What had started as a painful situation for me was quickly becoming entertainment. I knew Sarah would be leaving this weekend feeling more disappointed than I ever imagined. The next morning, I woke up ready to mess with them even more. I had already sent Sarah a bouquet of flowers, the same kind I used to send on our anniversaries. The delivery was timed perfectly, arriving just as things started to heat up between her and Jason again. When Sarah saw the flowers, her face went from surprise to irritation in seconds. She called me immediately. "Did you send me flowers?" she demanded, already upset. "Oh, you got them?" I replied casually. "Well, it hasn't exactly been a great day for me either. My wife's off with some other guy, and here I am trying not to lose my mind." "You always send me these flowers for our anniversaries," she snapped. I couldn't help but laugh. "And you think I sent them? Let me tell you, if I had sent those flowers, they wouldn't have been roses, they'd have been weeds, and the card would have read, 'To my cheating wife.' But hey, maybe they'll remind you of what you're throwing away." Stunned silence filled the line before I hung up on her. She tried calling back several times, but I didn't answer. Watching her face on the camera was priceless. She was fuming, but Jason, clueless as ever, reassured her that I'd come around. He couldn't have been more wrong. But I wasn't done yet. I decided to keep the fun going by ordering her favorite pizza, timed just as Jason was making another move. The delivery guy showed up at their door, and Jason had no choice but to pay for it. I watched as they awkwardly sat down to eat, clearly irritated by the interruption. Later, I ordered her favorite sandwich from a local deli, just for good measure. The knock on the door came right in the middle of their next attempt at intimacy. This time, Sarah's face dropped. She finally started to realize I knew exactly where they were, and that I wasn't letting them off easy. They got dressed and left the hotel for a while, hoping to shake off the distractions. Little did they know, I had more plans in store. That evening, they returned, and Sarah hopped into the shower almost immediately. She stayed in there for much longer than usual. When she came out, her breasts and crotch were bright red, clearly irritated by the pepper spray. Jason, of course, tried to make a move, but she snapped at him, saying she was in too much pain to continue. While they dealt with their miserable night, I spent mine organizing all the footage. I had every moment of their dull, pathetic affair captured on video, ready to hand over to my lawyer. I couldn't help but smile at how perfectly it was all coming together. Sunday morning, I packed up and headed home, ready for what was coming next. Sarah was in for the shock of her life when she returned. When Jason dropped her off that afternoon, he didn't even bother walking her to the door. He just let her out like she was nothing more than a delivery.